What is the future of the U.S. housing market? Today, we're joined by Melody Wright, who's a very well-known real estate investor and commentator, and we're going to get her perspective on the U.S. housing market overall, and also ways that we can use housing either in our own personal residence or in investment properties in order to grow our wealth. So, Melody, thank you for joining us, and it's good to have you here.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
What I wanted to do is start out with a broader question. In your view, over the next 2 years, where do you see the general U.S. residential housing market going? And also, if I can add to that, how do you think it's going to progress differently in the different parts of the country? I mean, to say, the big parts like the Northeast, the South, the West. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I think the path ahead is going to be a little challenging, and there's a lot of different reasons for that we'll go into. But I would say that the next couple of years, we're setting up for somewhat of a correction. There's a big narrative out there that we have an inventory shortage. I've been on the road traveling in many of these cities, especially the Sun Belt cities, as well as Western cities, some in the Northeast. And we have built aggressively at the same time that we're building multifamily as well. And so we've built single family homes to sell. We've also built single family homes to rent. We also have the greatest amount of multifamily in construction since the 70s, and we don't have the demographics to support it. And at the same time, we have this oversaturation of short-term rental properties that many of which either got sort of kind of changed direction from long-term rental, those properties that were sort of bought up at the end of the last crisis. Those got kind of either repurposed to short-term rental. That was one possibility. Or people actually built these short-term rentals themselves, like went out to a builder and said, hey, I need a giant 10-bedroom in Rosemary Beach, for a large family. Well, in doing a lot of this, I don't think a lot of people took into consideration that our travel patterns would go back after COVID was done, that families wouldn't be getting together in the same way quite, again. Now in Nashville, you're probably always going to have bachelorette parties, but you still don't need 8,000 short-term rentals. And so we have this very misunderstood housing market right now where most of mainstream media is saying that we have inventory problems and we need to build. But in reality, we've just got misallocation. And so, for instance, I like to ask people, hey, how many short-term rentals or Airbnbs do you think are in Austin, Texas? And a lot of times I'll get an answer of about 1,000, because that's what you'll see on Airbnb. If you search Austin, you're only going to get back 300 results, but in the top left-hand corner, it's going to say 1,000 plus here. In reality, you have over 14,000 short-term rentals in Austin, as well as you have a lot of hotels.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a lot of people think, how could short-term rental or Airbnb have anything to do with the housing market? Well, this is what you had so many people pile in wanting passive income, because I think, we all became sort of, disillusioned with corporate America trying to work our way ahead, right? We all know that wages haven't really kept up with inflation. During COVID, we got a little bit, sort of wage increases, but it's not keeping up at the pace needed to really feel like you can own a home. I mean, I think the latest figure out there right now is you have to make $114,000 to be able to get one of these medium priced homes, which is just absolutely ridiculous. The median income in our country is $79,000 and household income. So, but what happened is all these builders, everybody just kind of went out there hearing this beating drum about we don't have enough inventory, and everybody just kind of went bananas, and you'll still hear that. But we have absolutely overbuilt in many places. And what I would encourage people to do, I track around 70 cities, is, if you're in a large city, you're probably going to see this. Just search new construction, my city, go to one of these locations. You'll start to see what I'm talking about. So we have people who absolutely misunderstand what's happening. At the same time, we have, boomers retiring at about 10,000 a day. And we have about 15 million vacant properties in the country, a lot of them owned by those boomers who just got their insurance bill in the mail. And it says, hey, especially if you're down in Florida, that's 4 times what you paid last year, maybe even more. Or maybe if you're in Florida and California, you can't even get it, or Louisiana. Then they're going to get that tax bill on that higher assessed property value. And they're going to say, wait a minute, it's costing me 3 times to carry this house. Why don't I just sell this house, because it's such a good housing market right now? I'll take my equity and I'll invest that in short-term treasuries or money market funds. So all of these themes are going to be coming at the same time. Kind of those second homes coming to the market. You're going to have the short-term rentals. They didn't just buy one, because the lenders that they use for this, the private lenders, said, why buy one? You can buy 10. And so they bought 10. And so, all of these different themes are kind of coming, they're all headed like trains to the same station.
You mentioned,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned that there's been overbuilding.
Yes.
And we actually don't have an inventory shortage.
That's
Are
right.
there, and that we're going to probably see a correction, because of this confluence of factors here in the future. Right. I guess what I would ask is, when you say correction, what do you mean? Like,
Sure.
How much of a decline in general home prices, median home price? And then also, where do you see that overbuilding taking place the most? Like, what cities or what parts of the country that you think will most likely result in that correction?
Got it. Yeah. So I honestly think we'll end the year at positive home price appreciation, barring any exogenous event, which has gotten harder to even say that out loud in the past week and a half. If we stay on the same path and nothing changes, we don't have a credit event, we don't have significant job loss for some reason, we don't have a world war, these types of things, then likely next year across the country, you're going to see about a 5% decrease in prices. But if any of those things happen, that could get accelerated quite a bit, especially with significant job loss. That could really make things go topsy-turvy. Then I think the biggest correction actually comes in 2025. And then the years following that, you'll get minor, probably negative home price appreciation for a couple of years, but nothing as meaningful as what you would have between kind of next year, 2024 and 2025. And again, this is if nothing happens like a credit event. And I think, with the 10-year treasury yield where it is right now, we're seeing signs at some of the treasury auctions that we could be gearing up for a credit event this fall. And then that will just that could really speed things up. I often say to people, there's no secret law of physics that says that prices can't come down as fast as they went up. And, they went up gangbusters in the past couple of years, those COVID years. Now, where the most impacted markets are going to be the Sun Belt markets. So that's going to be, a lot of people put Las Vegas, Phoenix, Austin, Dallas, and Nashville, Charlotte, Florida. Those areas are very concerning from an overbuilt perspective. Like, I have a Substack. It's like a weekly newsletter, but I did a really good deep dive. I had a guest writer come in and talk about the permits for construction in these areas and how the Fed doesn't track canceled sales. And so we've seen a lot of cancellations for these new builds. And so there's more inventory out there than most even realize, which I've seen with my eyes by getting in the car in February, getting on the road, got back on the road in March, and then just spent the last 2 months down in Florida touring sites down there. So Florida and Texas are going to be the sort of the biggest, the hardest hit, put it that way.
Would the Northeast be included in that, or is the overbuilt primarily, like you said, in the Sun Belt? And would the Northeast also be overbuilt? And if it is, or if it is not, do you think we'll see as much of a correction there?
Yeah, so I think there are definitely areas, and then the Northeast has some other problems, like their demographics are really poor. And so I think this is the story we just can't stop talking about. We have to talk about it. Is the fact we're not birthing babies like we used to. We're not replacing population. We are looking more and more like Japan every day in terms of our aging demographics. And so already you're seeing a lot of shifts out of places like Pittsburgh, some of these northeastern cities. And so even though they didn't go as crazy as the Sun Belt, they still got in on we need inventory. And so these places will also be impacted. And I have a feeling, so it won't be as terrible as Florida. However, because of this aging demographic story, places like Boston, New York, they will be impacted as well. And, New York's an interesting one. It always seems to be its own market. But I think that the recent short-term rental legislation or regulation in New York City is really going to make that housing market very interesting, because there were about 26,000 short-term rentals there, and they're really clamping down on that. You have to live within the home, et cetera. So I don't think anywhere in the nation is going to escape. I can tell you right now, the places that are doing the best are the Midwest, like, Cleveland, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, believe it or not, Minneapolis is, I think, still going to be impacted, but it's still doing a little better than other places. In certain areas of that city, they're overbuilding. So I don't think anybody's going to escape completely, but there were certainly, just as we saw in the GFC, there will certainly be markets that'll be impacted far greater, as well as, whether or not you believe in climate change, we all know we're experiencing extreme weather right now, which could be just, we're in a cyclical weather pattern. To me, it doesn't matter why, but we're essentially, experience a lot of extreme weather and flooding events. And one big requirement that a lot of people, like, especially in Florida, they're having to get flood insurance because, we saw the hurricanes fighting between flood and wind insurance, so I think it's going to also matter where you live in the country. And I think some of these Sunbelt states are, the heat is just unbearable in the summer, the energy cost, all the things that so-called make it more affordable to live there. It kind of, it's not such a pleasant place sometimes in the summer. And then also, just having access to water, which our Midwest states are going to have a lot more access to water, with the Great Lakes, et cetera.
You mentioned that there's, an increase in inventory, that we have actually too many homes and not too few.
Right.
And assuming that is true, what would you attribute then the elevated nature of prices? Meaning to say, prices have stayed high, right? We saw interest rates rise quite a bit over the last couple of years, even though they're not really historically high.
That's right.
I know a lot of times, old people like me can remember 7 and 8% mortgage rates, and it's like, well, this is kind of normal, actually.
Average,
whereas a lot of people that I work with are, kind of, or at least younger people are like, oh my gosh, interest rates are so high. And as in reality, they're really not high. It's just that prices are high and interest rates are now normal. And so that combination seems to be a problem. But you would think that with higher interest rates, prices would at least soften some. And we haven't really seen that very much. And I'm curious, what's your perspective? Like, if we have this glut of inventory and we have higher interest rates, why haven't prices come back down?
Yeah, it's narrative. A lot of it is fear of missing out. And then I would say that investor participation is the biggest reason. And so, kind of around NAR, National Association of Realtors, different people have done different studies, but just think investor participation is about around that 29-30% in the market, meaning they're not buying that home to live in. They're buying it to do short-term rental. They're buying it to do long-term rental, etc. And so what'll happen, and there's also all kinds of tricks that people don't understand about listing properties. Like, so for instance, to get around some of these commission rules that you're hearing about these lawsuits against National Association of Realtor, you can do something like you say coming soon, you mark it as a coming soon property, and you can market that in the back end for 21 days with your private networks. And then that's just kind of a way around this commission thing. And then at day 21, what'll often happen, and I hear these stories from followers, they'll call out about this property and they'll say, oh no, it was already sold to a cash bidder, making it seem like these sales are happening a lot faster than they actually are. And so what you have out there, probably a year and a half ago, 2 years, I was like, it's not that anybody's doing anything wrong, but at this point, I feel people are misleading. They're saying things like, you can date the rate, meaning you'll be able to refi in the future. But the realtors and the people that make money from this transaction, it's in their vested interest not to tell you that there's a lot of competition, right? I mean, this is a marketing gimmick from the beginning of time. And so there's all different ways that you can make people think that there's less inventory. And I talk about this a lot, like on the new build sites where I would go, they do this thing called salt the lots, and they'll have green sold stickers for the ones that have really sold, red sold stickers for the ones that haven't sold. So the salesperson knows those really aren't sold. But the whole idea is to make you think that you've got to act fast or you're going to miss out, right? And so I think that a lot of, so on top of the investor participation, there's also industry, kind of vested interest in making it seem like there's less inventory than there is. And then I won't even get started talking about the listing sites. They definitely do not have all the inventory. But so that's why I think prices have remained high, is the narrative. And then at the same time, they really haven't when you take the new builds, because essentially what the builders did was affect a 15 to 25% price reduction through a rate buy down, where they basically kind of buy you out of that higher rate for the first couple of years or the first year, as well as they were giving a ton of incentives like paying for your solar the first year, giving you all new appliances, paying your HOA fees. And so in essence, they affected a price reduction, but it doesn't look like it at top of the line. So I think what's so hard for everyone to understand is that there's multiple drivers. It's not just one thing. And when we go back and look at the last crisis, a lot of people think that was about subprime. Again, that was the kindling. That wasn't the actual, what ended up being the fire that raged on for years. But yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the investor participation. So your institutionals got out, your institutional investors got out in 22, but your mom and pops came in hearing all these stories about how they can make $10,000 a month on a short-term rental. But unfortunately, you're not going to make that much down in Kyle, Texas. That's 22 miles south of Austin, no matter what AirDNA tells you. So, there's a lot.
You mentioned that you saw really potentially next year, 2024, kind of like a 5% correction, if we're talking about a general average across the country.
Right.
And then you said in 2025, you would see a deeper correction. How much of a correction do you think we will experience, a couple years out? And what do you think the reason for that will be?
Yeah. So I think it'll probably be double digits, probably 12% correction in 25. I think net, you're looking at about a almost 30% correction, in my opinion, across the country, because price has to meet affordability one way or the other, either through the market or the government's going to intervene, which they absolutely will. And they already have to some degree with a lot of these down payment assistance programs, et cetera. So fairly significant price reduction. And, in certain areas like Austin, Phoenix, Charlotte, Florida, like those are we could see that. We could see something that deep as like a 20% correction next year. Honestly, in some areas, I think that could be a possibility, because you're seeing a lot of the super prime list in Florida specifically. So I think they're going to be the epicenter, and they'll kind of lead the nation, with Texas as a close second.
And maybe I missed this. What is it that you see as the cause of that? Is it going to be an increase in unemployment? Is it going to be rising interest rates so that sellers can't sell at the prices they wanted? Kind of a combination of that? Like, what do you think will be the major driver of that?
So it's going to be a whole bunch of things at once. It's going to be all that inventory that I kind of talked about at the beginning, kind of the second homes that'll come to market, the oversaturation of short-term rental, the build to rent, the multifamily. But what's going to drive most of this is affordability. I mean, people cannot afford these homes that are being built out there, or the ones that people are pretending to sell out there. Not only were interest rates bad, but to your point, Patrick, it's the prices. So even if we get a reduction in interest rates, the price is still high, which is going to support higher insurance, support higher assessed tax value. And that honestly is a lot of what happened last time. The expenses just got to be too much for your average American. So that equity means nothing to them, because if they tried to sell that home right now, they wouldn't probably even get a same size house, And so as much as they think they're wealthy right now, there's no tapping that equity unless you do something like a home equity product, et cetera, which actually has already kind of happened with some of the COVID workouts, the payment deferrals, et cetera, those things. So that equity is going to be meaningless to these people. And so, and the only way they're going to be able to pay their bills is by taking out equity, over leveraging themselves. And we're already seeing underwater borrowers. I mean, it's shocking to me, as someone who helped manage the last crisis. I never thought we would be here again. I never thought we would get here this quickly in mortgage, even this time around, because of all the changes we made. But there's other factors that have put us there again. And so, yeah.
A lot of our viewers are either active military or veterans. And, obviously, when you're in the military and you're moving around, sometimes you become I like to call it a reluctant landlord, right? Because maybe you move to one duty station, you buy a home, and then you move to another one, and you either aren't able to sell it, or something kind of prevents you from doing that. I guess what I would ask is, as a general rule, and again, we're not giving individualized financial advice to people with this. This is just kind of a broad overview. It sounds like probably if there's a service member that is doing a PCS move, that is transferring anywhere kind of in the Sun Belt, especially if it's in a major city, right now probably wouldn't be a good time to buy a house. Probably, especially if they know they're not going to be there for very long. Probably better to rent. Again, not giving individualized advice, but that seems to be kind of the thrust of, what you're saying, because there's a lot of risk right now, especially in those areas.
Correct.
Okay.
And although you might, depending on what kind of negotiator you are, I'm not one of those. There going to be desperate sellers out there already, and especially if you're in one of the Sun Belt states, like if you're in Texas and you just want to buy, not my recommendation, but go out and look for properties with tax liens on them, things like that. That's who is in trouble, and you can negotiate with them. But yeah, if you can rent right now, and you can get a good deal on rent in all of these places, if you just kind of negotiate, because we are seeing, especially in Texas, a lot of decreases in occupancy because of all the multifamily and all the built to rent coming online. And there is a lot of built to rent. So just whole neighborhoods of homes that were built for rentals. So you'll be able to get a good deal for renting if you negotiate.
Do you see rents continuing to go up over the next couple of years, or not? And the reason I ask is because I think there's a general belief. I mean, first off, I know a lot of the CPI is influenced by the cost of housing,
Right.
especially
Right.
rent and owner's
Right.
equivalent rent.
Right.
But a lot of people I think have in their mind, especially investors, that rents only always go up, right? It's either they stay flat or they go up, they never go down. And what's your perspective over the next few years? Do you think rents are going to kind of follow housing prices, or are they
Yeah,
going to?
they're coming down, and they're already coming down. So, I think we've flattened the year over year increase. And in some markets, they're already coming down in Phoenix and other markets like that. And they will continue. You have so much inventory from the multifamily and built to rent coming online. There's going to be so much competition. And this long-term rental, because what's happening is people in the short-term rental market are saying, okay, well, I can't do Airbnb in Kyle, Texas. What can I do? I can do long-term rental. And so that was short-term rental is going to kind of move over to long-term rental, plus the new inventory with the multifamily, which they're going to offer all kinds of incentives, rent specials, first 3 months free. I mean, I'm already seeing that. I track 70 cities, and every single page on these rental listings is, the top 6 or 7 are like, 1 month free or rent concessions. So it's already happening.
Yeah, you bring up a good point with the rents, and you also brought it up previously with the prices, is there's always that desire, I think, either on the part of the seller, the developer, the builder, the landlord, to keep the price higher. They'll give you lots of incentives in order to keep that price higher, because then that affects the comps, right? And
exactly,
it keeps everybody's properties values high. And so
That's
it does create a little bit of an illusion
exactly.
that the prices are higher than they actually are. So you make a really good point with that. And it's good for our listeners or viewers to hear that, because there's a lot of manipulation that can take place. Where would you say, I know we said the Sun Belt's kind of a risky place. I know we touched on the Northeast and the Midwest some, and you said the Midwest is probably the least bad. Are there any particular cities where you say, hey, buying here, even at these higher prices or higher interest rates is less risky? Like, for instance, I live in Washington, D.C. I know there's risk everywhere, but sometimes I've heard, well, D.C., it's not as much risk because there's lots of money there. There's lots of people there that have great jobs. And it's like, well, I mean, you don't know how long that will last. And I'm just kind of curious what your perspective is on maybe some of the cities of the Northeast or the Midwest. I know we mentioned demographics, but are there any particular cities that you see as being less risky?
Yeah, I kind of have a checklist, right? I kind of, climate is decent. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. There's access to water, not like Phoenix where whole subdivisions had to be shelved because there's no groundwater. I'm not sharing the Colorado River with 6 other states.
Right.
So that's, kind of and then, just the cost. And so states like Tennessee, not in Nashville, for instance, stay far away from Nashville, but like the smaller cities like Knoxville, Johnson City, where I'm actually right now, although I don't want, a ton of people coming down here either. But in terms of, because that's what happens, right? Everybody just goes to where it's cheaper, and then all of a sudden it's not cheap anymore, or et cetera. But I do think Tennessee, because of its property taxes being so low, access to water, just kind of a milder climate than some other states. So I think Cleveland, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, these areas. I mean, Ohio gets a bad rap. I mean, it's really it's a very beautiful state. But, I do think what's important is that you can't look at markets where there's no job potential, because what happens in the Sun Belt states is that the only job growth there usually is hospitality or things like this. And those jobs don't pay well. So what you're seeing already in Texas and Florida is that people that move down there to kind of work during COVID, they're moving back because they can't actually afford to live there. There's no kind of career growth. And so I think that's the other thing to look at, kind of like you were saying, in DC, likely the government, that's going to be giving jobs there. Like, there's a lot of activity in DC. So wherever you move, I wouldn't bank on the fact that you'll always be able to work from home, obviously. And I know that we're talking to veterans or active military, and you don't get a lot of choice sometimes. Um, but definitely look at a place where you can sustain yourself. That's really important, and have access to power and water, because aging infrastructure is also a huge concern in many of these places. Like Texas, where the power went out for a week after the ice storm. Things like that. You really, there's so much to take into consideration. It's not a quick answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. You actually bring up a lot of good points, because I don't think a lot of people think about job markets, demographics, the wages people are paid in an area. Does it support the prices? Even infrastructure. You bringing that up, that's a really good point. Like, I hadn't thought of that. Like, is aging infrastructure play a huge role? Because if you're out of power or out of water for days, that's going to affect property values big time.
Oh yeah. And also your insurability, because it's typically a weather event that knocked you out, and so that, like, Louisiana is often thought as one of the cheapest places, but they're having horrible issues with insurance down there, and you have to use the government backed insurer. So places you think that could be cheap actually end up being very risky.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Melody, you've really shared a lot of valuable information with us. How would our viewers reach you if they want to follow you, or they want to connect with you at some level and get your perspective on different topics in housing? How do they contact you, or how do they follow you?
Sure. So they can reach me on Twitter at M3_Melody, MELODY. On Substack, that's my weekly sort of newsletter, M3 Melody Substack. On YouTube, M3 Melody YouTube. And then on LinkedIn, I'm Melody Wright. And one thing I just wanted to say quickly is, you'll see in my writing, I often say that, with housing, sometimes there's not a choice because of divorce, default, death, and the DOD, because they move you guys around.
Right.
So, it's been, thank you so much for having me, because I definitely wanted to be able to talk to our service members, because I think, they are often having to participate in this market in times when, and not the most ideal times, I guess I would say.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for acknowledging that. What I will do is I will post below this video kind of those links that you share, just for everybody to have access to.
Yeah.
But once again, Melody, thank you again for your time, for your expertise. We'd love to have you back at some point in the future, and we'll see how the market progresses until then.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
And to our viewers, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe.